All right, everybody. We are just a minute after the hour here. And I know that we're still going to have a few people joining us, but we only have an hour, and I do want to be respectful of your time today. So welcome to today's webinar on rural stress and ambiguous loss. My name is Emily Kreckelberg. I am an extension educator with University of Minnesota Extension. My topic area is farm safety and health. And so I have done a lot of work in the past few years in the arena of rural stress and farm stress, and also how safety and health tie together as well. For me, they're all interconnected in this great web. And so really excited to have you here today. My co-author and co-instructor, Jennifer McGuire, unfortunately is not able to join us today. But she is an associate professor in the Department for Family Social Science and is an extension specialist with our Center for Family Development. So this work is kind of a culmination of the stuff that both Jennifer and I do, and we've been able to bring it together, which we're really, really excited about. I will also add as we go through this, as I mentioned, Jennifer couldn't be here today. So bear with me, I'm going to be presenting her slides. So might be a little rusty on that, but I appreciate your patience as I get through that. So I kind of want to start just by setting this up a little bit in what has kind of already been done as we think about ambiguous loss from a farming or a rural perspective. So this book, and I happen to have one right here, this is the second edition of a booklet that was originally written by Pauline Boss. And if you're familiar with the work of Dr. Boss, she is really the pioneer, I would say, of ambiguous loss theory. And in 2000, she published a booklet about ambiguous loss and farming. And, it was a bit of a workbook and had different strategies for coping with ambiguous loss. And about 3 years ago now, that book was given to me. And I just thought it was so great and so applicable even still to what is happening both in rural communities and in our world at large as well. There's a lot of ambiguous loss present in what we're doing, and we'll talk more about that in just a little bit. And so this is the second edition of the booklet. So Pauline, entrusted Jennifer and I to create this updated workbook, this updated version of this amazing piece of information. And so we're really excited to have that. And I'll talk a little bit more later on about the workbook and the curriculum that we have written to go along with it, specifically to work with farm families. But I know some of you work with other populations as well, where some of this will hopefully be really relevant to you. So just starting really quickly with running through stress in rural communities. And I'm sure many of you know a lot of these things, have seen a lot of these things, but there's a lot of, forces at play here, as we know, in any community. Economics, a lot of rural communities have environment dependent industries, so farming, mining, forestry, all of those kinds of things. We also know our rural communities have a lack of resources. So that can be healthcare resources. I know there are some areas in northern Minnesota where the nearest hospital with an OB/GYN is 100 miles away. So that puts people at risk. We know childcare is a big issue. Unemployment can be an issue in our rural communities as well. We also look at things like the opioid crisis and higher suicide rates. In the state of Minnesota, the suicide rate for greater Minnesota is higher than that of the 7-county metro. So if we're looking at that, the 80 greater Minnesota counties have a higher suicide rate than the 7-county metro. We're also seeing issues of job loss And then out-migration of a lot of various groups within the community, but especially LGBTQ people as well. So there are a lot of things that, again, are putting stress on these rural communities, and a lot of that has to do with a lack of things, or of people leaving, or things being gone. And now diving in a little bit deeper on the farming side. So again, that's really my perspective. That is where I come from with this. But again, a lot of this is applicable to all sorts of audiences and communities and groups as well. And I will say right off the bat, so the example I will use here, and this is the family that I'll kind of refer back to illustrate what ambiguous loss is. This is my own family. So just to start, a little bit of background. I grew up on my family's dairy farm. You can see it in this picture here. Our dairy farm is in South Central Minnesota, Leesore County to be exact. And so one of the things to note here as well is that we were, small family farm, dairy and crops. And then there's me and my siblings. So there's 5 of us kids in my family. And there's my dad, the patriarch of the family. And you may notice in this picture that my dad only has one leg. So another big reason I do a lot of work in the safety and health realm is because of my dad. He lost his leg in a farming accident when he was 19 years old. And so in my family, we always grew up with an awareness of the dangers of farming and what the consequences of that can be. And then enter my brother, Jake, who you will notice is also missing a limb. Jake lost his arm in an accident eerily similar to my dad's about 5 years ago, 5.5 years ago. And so that was another thing that has impacted our family over time. This is my dad and I, and this picture, and actually the first picture of the cows, this was from my last time at the farm milking the cows with my dad. He made the heartbreaking decision to sell the dairy cows in April of 2018, which it was hard. It was a necessary choice. It was more retirement than anything, but it was still a really difficult time. And then there's my dad and my brother. They are the ones who manage our farm today. So we no longer milk cows, but my brother rents the farmland from my dad, and my dad helps him farm the land. And my brother also raises beef. So our joke in the family is, we have a farm, it's run by 2 farmers with 6 limbs, and that's all you need to make it work. So again, I'll refer back to my family as we go, but the big things I want to emphasize here as we think about and frame up ambiguous loss is thinking about health, how that impacts it, relationships with family, selling the cows, all of those kinds of things will all kind of culminate into something here. And then just briefly thinking about, the unique stressors, and you'll see these stressors in other areas too, but specifically with rural families and farming families, we see a lot of stressors related to economics and finance. And again, I think that's something that families from all walks of life are feeling, especially now. Production and environment in agriculture is really, really important. And as we experience more climate change and all of these extreme weather events, that really takes a toll. Livestock, crops, machinery, all these things that go into the day-to-day function. Family and relationships, that is something that I think COVID has shined a big light on, how important those things are and how much some families may struggle with those things. And then just general health and wellness. So in agriculture and in a lot of our rural communities, it's very labor intensive work that's available for people. So we're talking long hours, physically and mentally demanding, high instance and risk of injury and illness. And then barriers to help in these communities. As I already talked about on the earlier slide, we know that lack of healthcare and resources is very real. And in addition, there are these perceived barriers, you know, stigma and those types of pieces as well that we need to be aware of. So now we'll dive a little bit more into getting into this, you know, stress and crisis and loss and grief and all of these things. So, you know, family stress is defined by Pauline Boss as a disturbance in the steady state of the family system. So it may emerge from a family's external context, internal context, or both simultaneously, meaning it may be caused by something from within the family, but also could be caused by an external resource or external force, you know, again, such as COVID. COVID has become a really, really good, easy and, you know, relevant example for this. And then there's family crisis, which is defined as a disturbance in the equilibrium that is so overwhelming, a pressure that is so severe, or a change that is so acute that the family system is blocked, immobilized, and incapacitated. So family boundaries, family roles, family tasks, all of those are disrupted. Members do not function at optimal levels psychologically or physically. And I will say this too, crisis is usually more acute, happens on a shorter time frame. And then stress can be more chronic, can also be acute, but maybe chronic. So again, as we think about this, stress would be something like, you know, struggling with finances in your family and having to be really aware of budgeting and how you're spending your money. And then a crisis, for example, would be like for my family, when my brother lost his arm 5.5 years ago. That was a crisis in that our entire family system was incapacitated. And by that, that just means, right, none of us were going to our jobs. We were all at the hospital with my brother. We were still milking cows at that time. None of us were there taking care of them. I tell people to this day, I don't know who milked the cows when my brother had his accident, right? Because that didn't matter. When you're in a crisis, I mean, we go down to the very bare bones of, you know, what are we doing that's essential in this situation? And in that one, it was to be with my brother and his wife and supporting them. And so again, we're kind of looking at a disturbance versus basically a stop is really the difference between stress and crisis. And then as we talk about ambiguous loss and just loss in general, so loss as we know it is just, it's something that's gone, but there's closure with it, right? So for example, if someone passes away, but if it's, you know, they've been sick for a while, you know, perhaps I think of my grandma who was in a nursing home and was at a point where she was ready to let go, and we were able to come and say our goodbyes. So it was still a loss. It still hurt. There was still grief there, but it had closure. Like it did have a point where I was like, okay, there's no loose ends, no questions I still have. Whereas an ambiguous loss is unclear. It does not have closure, and it's possible that it will remain unvalidated, meaning other people may not really recognize it as a loss. And that's a really big difference between just typical loss and ambiguous loss is that. So some examples that Jennifer had put on here, you know, is COVID disruptions. And now as we kind of move out of COVID, returning to work. And, you know, some people like myself, I'm still working from home full time. And, you know, returning to the office, there's that loss of I'm not in my little safe nest all the time anymore. You know, and kids, the things that they had to give up or forego during their school year. You know, family differences, you know, that can be differences in opinion on a wide range of topics, fear of illness, a lot of those things. And we'll get into some more examples here as well. But I know right now you're probably still trying to grasp what is ambiguous loss? What does this really mean? So this is a chart that Jennifer put together that I think really helps explain it well. And so what you see here is that, again, I mentioned there's physical loss and there's psychological loss. So when we have both physical and psychological loss, that is a loss with closure. Okay. And then if there's no physical or psychological loss, then there is no loss. But if you focus on these green boxes, that is where we start to see ambiguous loss. And so there are two types. So type 1 is that there's a physical loss, but not a psychological loss. And then type 2 is where there's psychological loss, but no physical loss. And so again, when we're talking about physical loss, we mean an actual thing. So a person, an item, it could even be money. And then a psychological loss is something like a relationship, the meaning or the sentimental value of something. Those would be psychological losses. So a farming example of type 1 loss, so that would be physical loss without a psychological loss, from my own family when my dad sold our dairy cows. So physically the cows were gone, right? They were no longer on our farm. That was a physical loss. But psychologically, my dad even still, and it's been years now, he still identifies himself as a dairy farmer. And, and so, in his mind, psychologically, he is still in that place and in that space, but just doesn't have the physical presence of it anymore. And then an example of type 2 loss, where there's psychological loss, but no physical loss, could be a situation, and I'm aware of a lot of these across the state, where we see farm families that are probably enduring a lot of stress, potentially in crisis, and one or both parents are so preoccupied with the farm that they are no longer present in relationships with their kids, right? So physically, they are still there, they're still in the house, they're still eating breakfast with the kids, but mentally, psychologically, they're so preoccupied with other things that they aren't able to really nurture those relationships with their children. So again, that's the two types of ambiguous loss we see, but the main takeaway I want you to have from this slide basically is that ambiguous loss is a loss of one, but not the other, right? So if we've lost both, it's a loss with closure. And if we've lost neither, there is no loss. But if there's a loss of one and a presence of the other, that's where we see that ambiguity. A couple more examples just from general study of ambiguous loss. This theory has been applied a lot in situations of people with Alzheimer's and dementia. So physically, they're still around, they're still present, but psychologically, they're no longer with us, right? And that can be really difficult. And that's, an ambiguous loss in that respect. Also, people who may go missing. So, prisoners of war, or if somebody is kidnapped or goes missing, that's also an ambiguous loss, because again, they're physically gone, but psychologically, in our minds, we're telling ourselves they're still alive, there's been no body, there's been no funeral. So they're still here. Again, we're not putting closure on this situation. So the next slide is actually an excerpt from the booklet, which I mentioned. It is like a workbook. So there are parts to just read, but then there are some different activities and things in there to help people start to frame up what their situation is. And so we talk about getting unstuck. And we say that because a lot of the time people who are experiencing ambiguous loss, they may not know that that's what it is, or they haven't named it as that yet, but it's typically that they're feeling stuck about something, right? And so this is an exercise from the book that we have them do that really emphasizes, just asking like, where are you stuck? Where do you feel stuck? And then asking them to think about the loss that's tied to that feeling. Right. And another way that we phrase this too, sometimes people are like, well, I don't know what you mean by stuck. So we also say just simply like, what are the things that keep you up at night? Right. And those are the things that we're getting at here. So in this example, somebody on the farm may be stuck deciding whether or not to take an off-farm job, right? We need some additional income. Might be nice to have somebody with a job that carries health insurance, etc. But if we do that, we'll have less labor on the farm. And so that means we're going to have to give up some of the land that we rent because we simply won't have the manpower to manage all of it, right? And so that's, again, identifying this stuck feeling or this is what's keeping me up at night, is this decision or trying to figure this out. And then the reason that it's doing that is because it's tied to some sort of loss. This is a big part of ambiguous loss and coping with ambiguous loss, and that's strategies for moving forward. And whenever I talk to anybody about ambiguous loss or explain this work that we're doing, they always ask like, what, how do we fix it? Or how can I support the people in my life experiencing this? And, Jennifer and I are always very, very clear and honest that this isn't about curing it, right? That's not something that we can do. What we're really trying to do is help tee families up to be able to basically build more resilience. There we go. That's the word I was looking for. So, and as we know, resilience is what helps us get through adversity, and resilience is built in adversity. And so we really focus on that and realizing that there is no textbook, cookie cutter thing that's going to solve this problem for everybody, right? But we need to find the strategies that will help, get us more resilient and back on track with where we need to be. So one of those is shifting gears. So finding a new path and figuring out how we're going to move forward. With shifting gears, we talk about first order change and second order change. Most people are very, very familiar with first order change, which is basically, when things are tough, when things are hard, when things aren't going well, we are just going to work harder. We're going to work harder. We're going to work longer. We're going to do more. And since we're talking shifting gears, a car example of this, first order change is you're going up a hill and you press harder on the gas, right? So then second order change is really what we see when we reach that point when we realize just alone working harder is not going to do it, right? So again, back to our car example, you may have the pedal to the metal and then your car engine coughs and dies, right? And people burn out and all of those things as we consider this. So when we look at second order change, right, we're thinking about, shifting our gears down to get us up that hill and, making some changes and finding ourselves a new path. The next strategy that we talk about is perspective taking. So understanding a situation not only through our own lens, but through the lens of others, especially in a farming context. We talk a lot about it with farm families and farm employees, and understanding that the way we view a situation may not be the way that other people view it. And so just sharing your own perspective and listening and respecting other people's perspectives so that we can really get a much broader view of what the situation truly is. And the example of this that we have in the booklet is, well, it's my take. It's a little piece of art based on the parable, if you're familiar, from India, of the blind man and the elephant. So basically, let's say 6 or 7 men approach this elephant and they all feel a different part of the elephant, the tail, the tusks, the ears, etc. Right? And so they're each drawing their own conclusion about what an elephant is based on the one perspective they have, which is their own. And then in the end, when they all share what they saw, they get a much better picture for what an elephant actually looks like. It's more than just its tail or its ear or its tusks. So that's really what we want to emphasize here, is just trying to get, again, the full picture, seeing the forest, not just the trees, those kinds of things. Next one for building resilience and moving forward in ambiguous loss is meaning making. So, that's to me kind of self-explanatory. So just finding ways to honor and remember whatever it may be, to find meaning in both what has happened and what is happening now, what the path forward is. That can be a really powerful one for a lot of people, is meaning making. Another one, which may seem a little, I don't want to say strange, but one that often we don't consider is power dynamics. And again, this is really especially in the farming context, or really any kind of context where there's, different levels of power. So, there may be the patriarch and the matriarch, and then there's, the next generations and the generations before, and just understanding how those dynamics have changed or may need to change to move forward can also be, really helpful for people to explore and to consider. Next is recognize what is not lost and why. And so this one, when we're talking ambiguous loss, right? And the word loss is right in there. These are people that are going through something where things are gone. And it's really easy, as we know, to focus on that more negative piece of, this is what we've lost and all of this. And we need to think more about what we haven't lost, right? Things, it's not just losing a way of life. It's a changing way of life. And so what is not lost and why isn't it lost? And what this strategy really gets at is identifying strengths, right? So, we haven't lost our family unit as we are. We haven't lost our love and our passion for the land or for agriculture, for whatever it may be. And those strengths can, again, help people find that path forward. And then last is sharing information. So sharing information is really just communicating with each other among the family and the other people in the situation as well, of, here's how I'm feeling and here's what I know, and allowing them to share those things as well. Again, it's kind of similar to the perspective taking piece, in that we're really trying to make sure that everybody has all the information and everybody is getting the full picture, so that we can continue to build and move forward together. So I do have more slides, but I'm going to kind of shift gears after this to talk a little bit more about the booklet and the curriculum that we have developed itself. So first, I just wanted to pause here and ask if anybody has any questions really on the theory and application of ambiguous loss.
Emily, there was one question in the chat from Linda, and she wanted to know if the resources or research that you've been citing related to stressors are in the handbook. She's really eager to share those particular pieces of information with her team.
Yep. Yeah. All of those will be in the book. I'm honestly not sure. I might have a resources slide on here. But yes, so those things can be made available, and we'll be sending some follow-up emails in that. And so, yes, we can get some more information on that. Are there other questions? Okay, I'm not seeing or hearing anything, so I'm going to keep going. And then if you have questions though that come up afterwards, feel free to throw them in the chat and we'll have some time for more discussions and questions at the end as well. So the next thing I want to talk about a little bit more is these facilitator trainings that we're going to be doing. So as I mentioned, we have the booklet and that is available, but we also, Jennifer and I, came up with this curriculum to go along with the booklet. So they're really meant to be paired together. They both follow the same order of topics and those kinds of things. And it really, for us, you know, we think going through the workshop of the curriculum along with the workbook will just help people, you know, understand the concepts a little better, get people more engaged with the material, which is really what we want to see, because that's, you know, how we're going to see these things build and how we're going to be able to help support these families as they work on becoming more resilient and coping with their ambiguous loss and those pieces. So just a little brief teaser here, as it were. So again, we are going to have some facilitator trainings. We were very, very grateful to receive some funding from the Minnesota Department of Agriculture to offer these facilitator trainings free of charge. And so I'll start on the right side column here of who should attend. So the people we really envision being facilitators and using this material are professionals who work with farm families, you know, individuals specifically who want to provide the program. So that could be county educators, county and municipal employees, public health and social workers in rural areas. You know, basically we don't have any strict qualifiers or prerequisites to be a facilitator, but we really want you to be somebody who is engaged actively with farm families. And there will be CEU units available to those of you if that is a part of your profession that you need continuing education. The one thing I see I don't have on here is that there is an expectation, because we have been given grant funding for this, that trained facilitators will be responsible for doing this program and going through the program with 3 to 5 farm families. And that needs to be done per the terms of our funding by the end of July of this year. So we know it's a little bit of a tight timeline, but we also understand that a lot of people are in a position where they are ready to be doing this and offering these. And so we're really excited to get this off the ground and to get moving. So the trainings that we do have scheduled, and if you want to jot these down, so you can save the date. There will be a training on April 12th in St. Cloud, on April 21st in Moorhead, and on April 28th in Mankato. All the trainings will be held from 9 to 1:30. Again, they are free of charge. Lunch will be included. You will get all of the materials that you need. You'll get some booklets. You will get a toolkit with all the presentations and everything you need to do to put on this program. And the registration for that should be available next week. And so if any of you on here are interested, of course, we already have your email addresses. So we will be sending that registration link out to all of you. If you are interested, or if you have colleagues that you think may be interested, you can pass it on to them as well. So please keep an eye out for that email and for that announcement to register. Each of the sites is limited to 20 people. So be mindful of that as well. But again, we would love to have you join us for these trainings. and love to have your assistance in helping farm families learn about and work through ambiguous loss in their lives. All right, so that's all that I have on that. That was kind of a quick ending there. But if you want more information or have any questions, and I know Linda, you wanted some information and some additional information on outmigration of LGBTQ communities. So you can contact myself or Jennifer, and we'd be more than happy to work with you on that. I see that Rick just put in the chat the link to our webpage on the Extension website that tells you a little bit more about the workbook and about the training. And that site also, once we have the registration link live, will be on that webpage as well. So if that's something you want to go to and bookmark, you can certainly do that also. All right, are there any other questions or anything that I can answer? Yes, if you are interested in doing a training, you only need to attend one. Yep. So it'll be the 1 4-hour training or whatever we have it scheduled for. All right. And then I don't know, Rick or Sarah, was there an evaluation link or is that going to be emailed out?
Thank you for asking. I'm just going to put that in the chat. I was just grabbing that, and we will include this in a follow-up email as well. So please take a few minutes, and if you want a certificate of participation for this webinar, complete the evaluation, and we will, there's a question in there if you want a certificate, and respond yes, and one will get sent to you.
Yes, so please do fill out that evaluation. It shouldn't take you more than a few minutes, and we really do value your feedback on our webinar series. So we really appreciate that. And again, if there's any questions you have right now, please feel free to get a hold of myself or Jennifer. And in the coming week, watch for an email from us with that registration link for the facilitator training.
Emily, I'm also going to put another link into the chat, and this is a